What if I told you that one man, born on the rugged frontiers of ancient Persia, would rise to build the largest empire the world had ever seen? And what if I told you that within a single lifetime, his vision of kingship would transform from a local rebellion into a realm stretching from the mountains of Central Asia to the shores of the Mediterranean? This is not just the story of kings and armies, it's the story of Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes, men whose names echoed through palaces and battlefields, whose decisions altered the fate of nations, and whose empire, the Achaemenid Empire, became the blueprint for global rule. Their triumphs were breathtaking, their mistakes devastating. From the capture of Babylon to the clash with Greece, from golden thrones to blood-soaked battlefields, this is history at its most dramatic. Stay with me, because over the next chapters, we'll unravel the rise of the Achaemenids, their cunning, their glory, their downfall. And if you think you know ancient history, think again. Because this empire story is filled with secrets, betrayals, and moments that will leave you questioning how power is truly won, and how it is inevitably lost. So, are you ready to step into the world of Kings of Kings? Make sure to hit subscribe and stay till the end, because every chapter in this saga builds to a revelation you won't want to miss. Have you ever wondered how empires are truly born? Not in the dust of battles alone, but in the quiet moments when an ambitious dreamer decides that the world should bend to his vision. Cyrus's story begins like this, with shadows of prophecy, family betrayal, and the slow awakening of a man who refused to remain a subject in someone else's empire. The world he inherited was fractured. Persia itself was not a mighty nation yet. It was a vassal, subject to the powerful Median Empire. The Medes controlled the highlands, their kings feared and respected across the region. Persia was little more than a frontier land, rough, tribal, looked down upon by its supposed masters. And yet, out of this obscurity would rise the very man who would one day topple them. But how? Legend tells us that Cyrus's birth was surrounded by whispers of danger. Astyages, the Median king, had dreamt that his daughter's child would overthrow him. Terrified, he ordered the infant to be killed. But fate intervened. A shepherd took pity and raised the boy in secret. As the boy grew, his charisma, intelligence, and uncanny sense of destiny became impossible to hide. By the time Astyages discovered the truth, it was too late. Cyrus had already begun carving his place in history. But here's where the story twists. The very Median army sent to crush him turned against their king. Soldiers, weary of Astyages' tyranny, rallied behind Cyrus. Imagine the scene, a young, untested rebel standing before the battle lines, his voice echoing across the plains, convincing hardened warriors to betray their own monarch. This wasn't just chance. It was the spark of genius, the kind of charisma that turns rebellion into revolution, and with the fall of Astyages, Cyrus was no longer a shepherd's ward. He was now a king in his own right, ruler of both Persians and Medes. For the first time in history, the foundation of what would become the Achaemenid Empire was laid. Yet, Cyrus was only beginning. His eyes turned westward, toward the kingdom of Lydia, a land of immense wealth, ruled by a man whose name still carries weight. Croesus. Croesus was famed for his riches. His treasury overflowed with gold, and his oracle at Delphi told him cryptic prophecies that seemed to promise victory. When Cyrus advanced, Croesus believed he could crush the young Persian king. At Sardis, Lydia's glittering capital, the two powers clashed. Cyrus's forces were outnumbered, but he unleashed a shocking tactic: camels. Knowing the Lydians' war horses feared the smell and sight of these beasts, he lined camels at the front. The horses panicked, throwing Lydia's cavalry into chaos. In the dust and confusion, Cyrus struck, capturing Croesus himself. And here, another legend unfolds. When Croesus, bound and defeated, was placed on a pyre to be burned alive, he cried out the name of Solon, the Athenian sage, who once told him, "Count no man happy until the end." Moved by the wisdom, or perhaps struck by divine signs, Cyrus ordered Croesus spared. Instead of death, Croesus became his advisor. It was a shocking act for its time, a conqueror sparing his enemy and turning him into a counselor. But this was Cyrus's genius. He didn't just win battles. He won people, yet his greatest triumph was still ahead. Babylon, the city of cities. Its walls towered higher than anything Cyrus's men had ever seen. Its ziggurats scraped the heavens. Its gates were said to be unbreachable. How could anyone bring down Babylon? The answer was cunning. Rather than assault its massive fortifications, Cyrus devised a plan that seemed impossible. The Euphrates River flowed through Babylon, right into the heart of the city. Under cover of night, Cyrus's men diverted the river into canals, lowering the water level. Then, his soldiers marched directly into Babylon through the dried riverbed. The city, confident in its walls, never expected an invasion from beneath. By the time the Babylonians realized what had happened, Cyrus had already claimed the throne. But this conquest was more than military brilliance, it was political revolution. Unlike other conquerors who crushed the peoples they ruled, Cyrus declared himself a liberator. He freed the Jews exiled in Babylon, allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. He respected local customs, gods, and traditions. For the first time, an empire wasn't built on fear alone, it was built on tolerance and diplomacy. His Cyrus Cylinder, often called the world's first charter of human rights, proclaimed his vision of rule. So here we are, standing in awe of this man who began in obscurity and rose to create an empire stretching from Anatolia to the Indus Valley. And yet, the story is far from over, because with every rise comes new challenges. Cyrus had shown the world how to build an empire. But what happens when a conqueror falls in battle, and a young heir must hold together lands that span thousands of miles? That, my friends, is where our journey continues. Because Cyrus's legacy would pass into the hands of kings who would test the very limits of empire, men like Cambyses, and later, the towering figure of Darius the Great. Have you ever noticed how the brightest flames often cast the darkest shadows? Cyrus the Great had forged an empire unlike anything the world had ever seen, but no throne remains empty for long. When Cyrus fell in battle around 530 BCE, the empire he left behind, vast, rich, and still fragile, was placed into the hands of his son, Cambyses. And with him, the story of Persia takes a sharp, dangerous turn. First, Cambyses seemed every bit his father's heir. His ambition matched the scale of the empire itself. But while Cyrus had won loyalty through mercy and diplomacy, Cambyses was about to show the world what conquest looked like when driven by obsession and paranoia. His target? Egypt, the ancient land of pharaohs, pyramids, and gods. Egypt at this time was ruled by Psamtik III, a young king but heir to millennia of tradition. The Egyptians were confident, believing their gods protected them from foreign invaders. But Cambyses was determined to bring Egypt under Persian control, no matter the cost. The march into Africa was brutal. Soldiers dragged supplies across deserts where heat scorched the earth and sandstorms swallowed men whole. Entire divisions were lost before ever reaching the Nile. And yet, Cambyses pressed on. Then came the fateful clash at Pelusium, a city at the edge of the Nile Delta. Here, Cambyses revealed a shocking tactic, one that turned the Egyptians' faith into their weakness. Knowing that cats, ibises, and dogs were sacred to the Egyptians, Cambyses ordered his soldiers to carry these animals before them in battle. To strike at the Persians would mean striking the very creatures the Egyptians worshipped. Imagine the terror and hesitation that swept through the Egyptian ranks. Their formations broke, their defenses crumbled, and Egypt fell. Cambyses entered Memphis in triumph, but the man who once sought to rival his father soon began to unravel. Herodotus tells us that Cambyses committed shocking acts of cruelty, slaying the sacred Apis bull, mocking Egyptian gods, even killing his own brother, Smerdis, out of suspicion that he sought the throne. Was this madness? Or calculated terror? The truth is blurred, but one thing was certain. His rule bred fear, not loyalty. While Cambyses pushed further into Africa, attempting to conquer Carthage and Ethiopia, rebellions erupted across the empire. His soldiers mutinied, his supplies dwindled, and his authority faltered. Then, as if fate itself had turned against him, a usurper rose in Persia claiming to be his murdered brother Smerdis. Whether this man was truly Smerdis or an impostor named Gormata remains one of history's great mysteries. But to the Persians, it didn't matter. They believed the rightful heir had returned, and Cambyses' legitimacy collapsed overnight. In a dramatic twist, Cambyses began the journey home to reclaim his throne. But he never made it. Struck by an accident, or perhaps an assassination, he died before reaching Persia. His empire, vast but fragile, now hung in the balance. Who truly ruled? Was it the so-called Smerdis, or was he a fraud manipulating the chaos for power? This was the moment the Achaemenid Empire could have shattered, splintering into rival kingdoms. And perhaps it would have, if not for the rise of one of history's greatest rulers. A man who would seize the throne, crush the pretender, and transform Persia from a fledgling empire into the most sophisticated state the world had yet seen. His name was Darius. and his path to power was soaked in blood, riddled with conspiracy, and marked by a gamble so daring that if he failed, the Achaemenid Empire would have vanished before it ever reached its height. What if the man sitting on the throne of the world's largest empire was not who he claimed to be? What if the King of Kings ruling Persia was nothing more than a fraud, an impostor who had stolen the crown while the empire's true heirs lay murdered? That was the mystery gripping Persia after Cambyses' sudden death. The man who now claimed the throne called himself Bardia, or Smerdes, the brother Cambyses had supposedly killed. To the people, his return seemed miraculous. He cut taxes, forgave debts, and won favor by easing the burdens Cyrus and Cambyses had left behind. The common people adored him. But whispers spread through the nobility. Some swore this man was not Cyrus's son at all, but a Magian priest named Gormida who bore an uncanny resemblance to Smerdes, and here enters Darius. Not yet a king, not even the most powerful noble in Persia, but a guard officer of royal blood, clever, ambitious, and utterly fearless. Alongside 6 fellow nobles, Darius plotted one of the boldest coups in ancient history, to storm the palace, expose the usurper, and seize the throne. The night of the conspiracy is still retold with drama worthy of legend. The 7 conspirators crept into the royal court, knives hidden beneath their cloaks. When they reached the king's chamber, they struck. A vicious struggle erupted. Gormida, if indeed it was him, fought desperately, but in the end, he fell beneath Darius's blade. Blood pooled across the floor of the palace, and with it, the fate of Persia was rewritten. But killing a pretender was not enough. The question loomed: who among the 7 would now rule? Each noble argued, until they devised a contest almost absurd in its simplicity. At dawn, they would mount their horses outside the city, and the man whose horse neighed first would be crowned king. Was this truly how empires chose their rulers? Herodotus thought so. Legend claims Darius's groom tricked fate by letting his master's horse smell a mare in heat, ensuring it would neigh at the perfect moment. And so, by chance, or cunning trick, Darius became the king of kings, yet he was no ordinary monarch. From the moment he grasped power in 522 BCE, Darius transformed the Achaemenid Empire from a sprawling collection of lands into a unified, enduring system of governance. He reorganized the empire into satrapies, provincial states ruled by governors loyal to him, each with defined taxes and responsibilities. To prevent rebellion, he sent inspectors, the king's eyes and ears, to watch over them. A secret police force centuries ahead of its time, Darius built the Royal Road, a highway stretching over 1,500 miles, linking the farthest edges of his empire. Couriers could now carry messages across continents in days rather than months. Imagine it. In an age when most people never traveled beyond their village, Darius created a communication system so efficient it rivaled modern postal networks. But he was more than an administrator. He was a builder. In the heart of Persia, he raised Persepolis, a city of dazzling palaces and monumental stairways, carved with images of tribute bearers from every corner of his empire. Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Indians, Greeks, all were immortalized in stone, walking together in procession. This was no accident. Darius wanted the world to see his empire not as a tyranny, but as a grand coalition under one supreme ruler still. Ambition knows no bounds. Darius sought not just to rule but to expand. He marched eastward into the Indus Valley, securing new lands rich with resources. He turned west toward Thrace and Macedonia, extending Persian influence into Europe itself. Everywhere his armies went, the empire grew stronger, richer, more unstoppable, and yet, for all his brilliance, Darius's greatest challenge lay not within his empire, but beyond it, across the Aegean Sea, where small, fractious city-states of Greece dared to defy him. When the Ionian Greeks revolted, supported by Athens, Darius swore vengeance. His gaze turned to mainland Greece, and in 490 BCE, the world would witness one of the most famous clashes in history, the Battle of Marathon. Picture the scene. Tens of thousands of Persian soldiers landed on the plains outside Athens, their banners snapping in the wind. Opposing them stood a much smaller Greek force, outnumbered nearly 3 to 1. To any rational mind, the Persians were destined to crush them. And yet, in a moment that stunned the world, the Athenians charged with reckless courage, their phalanx breaking through the Persian lines. The mighty army of Darius fled in chaos, leaving behind thousands of dead. For the first time, the Persian war machine had been stopped. Darius, humiliated, vowed to return and finish the conquest. But fate intervened. Before he could launch his second campaign, the great king of Persia fell ill and died in 486 BCE. His empire, though strong, now faced its greatest test yet, under the rule of his son, Xerxes. And Xerxes would not only inherit the throne, he would inherit his father's unfinished war. Have you ever imagined what it would look like if the largest army the ancient world had ever seen marched in unison, stretching farther than the eye could follow, with nations upon nations gathered under one banner? That is the vision Xerxes, son of Darius, brought to life. But as history would show, even the mightiest kings can be humbled by fate. When Xerxes inherited the Persian throne in 486 BCE, he also inherited his father's unfinished vendetta against Greece. To the Persians, the defeat at Marathon was not just a battle lost, it was an insult, a stain on their empire's honor. Xerxes swore before his court and his gods that Athens would burn. But to do so, he would marshal an invasion so vast it would dwarf anything the world had ever seen. Across the empire, orders rang out. From the sands of Egypt, the mountains of Persia, the valleys of Mesopotamia, and the plains of Central Asia, men were summoned. Herodotus claimed Xerxes's force numbered over 1 million, though in truth, perhaps closer to 200,000 or 300,000. Still, to the Greeks, this army felt infinite. Imagine watching a tide of men from every corner of the known world, Persians in scale armor, Indians with war elephants, Egyptians with tall shields, Scythians with deadly bows. It was not just an army, it was the empire itself in motion. Xerxes ordered an engineering marvel to ensure his conquest. To cross the Hellespont, the narrow strait between Asia and Europe, his men built not one but 2 massive pontoon bridges of ships bound together by cables. The sea itself was bent to his will. When a storm destroyed the first attempt, Xerxes flew into a rage so legendary that he commanded the waters of the Hellespont be whipped with chains, as if the very sea were his rebellious subject. Then, undeterred, he rebuilt the bridges and marched his army into Europe. But as Xerxes advanced, the Greeks faced an impossible choice: submit or resist. Many city-states wavered, but a few stood defiant, led by Sparta and Athens. And so, in 480 BCE, the clash began at Thermopylae, the hot gates, where mountains and sea narrowed into a single pass. Here, a small Greek force, led by King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, prepared to make a stand. Picture the scene. Xerxes's army, vast and unstoppable, filling the horizon. Leonidas and his men, clad in bronze and crimson, standing shoulder to shoulder in the narrow pass. For 2 days, wave after wave of Persians charged, only to be cut down. Arrows darkened the sky, but the Spartan shields held firm. Even the elite Persian Immortals, handpicked for their skill, could not break them. To Xerxes, it must have seemed inconceivable that his grand army could be halted by so few. But betrayal sealed Thermopylae's fate. A Greek trader revealed a hidden mountain path, allowing Persian troops to flank the defenders. Leonidas, realizing the end had come, dismissed most of the Greek army. With only his 300 Spartans and a few allies, he fought to the last breath, buying time for Greece at the cost of their lives. When Xerxes finally stepped over the bodies at Thermopylae, he had won the pass, but at a price that echoed through eternity. Yet Xerxes pressed on. His army surged south, and Athens was abandoned. Flames devoured the city, the Parthenon reduced to ash. To the Persians, it seemed victory was at hand. But Athens was not finished. Themistocles, a cunning Athenian leader, devised a plan to turn the tide. He lured Xerxes's navy into the narrow straits of Salamis, where the sheer number of Persian ships became their weakness. In the chaos of battle, smaller, faster Greek triremes rammed the crowded Persian vessels, splintering their hulls. The sea itself seemed to churn with wreckage and drowning men. From his throne upon a golden chair on the shore, Xerxes watched in disbelief as his mighty fleet shattered before his eyes. The empire's power had met the defiance of a handful of city-states, and faltered. Staggered, Xerxes retreated, leaving behind part of his army to continue the fight. But within a year, at Plataea, the Greeks struck again, routing the Persian forces once and for all. The invasion had failed. The dream of conquering Greece was over, and yet, Xerxes's story did not end there. He returned to Persepolis, where his reign grew increasingly marked by luxury, intrigue, and assassination plots. The man who had commanded the greatest army the world had ever seen now found himself haunted by betrayal within his own court. The once unbreakable empire began to show cracks. And as Xerxes's life ended not with glory, but with the thrust of an assassin's blade, the Achaemenid Empire began its slow descent from greatness.